Hello and welcome to Everyday Lessons Every Day. I'm David McBee. Based on my book by the same name, this podcast is for those of us who believe in personal growth and want to improve every day. In this 2021 season, the stories come directly from people whose lives have been impacted in a positive way by an everyday lesson that they've learned. This is episode 29, blank blah 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 blah, with Stephen Heiner. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Well, it's morning for me. It's what time is it for you?
It's sometime 3 p.m. I'm in the future.
Tell our listeners how is it that you're calling me from the future?
Well, that's what happens when you're in Europe and talking with a friend who lives in the United States. We're a little bit in the future.
That's right. And you're in Paris, right?
That is correct.
Awesome. Well, that's already a cool nugget about you. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself real quick?
Sure. So this is the beginning of my 8th year in Paris. I moved here in 2013 after selling a test prep company. I moved to Europe and decided I wasn't going to replicate what I had done in the US in terms of hours worked, what I was chasing. I was going to do something different. And that evolved through my different years here in France. What I currently do, among other things, is I create content for small businesses. So their blogs, email newsletters, press releases. And then I also do some freelance writing for magazines and websites on culture and immigration.
And you're a single guy, and about how old are you, if you don't mind sharing?
I don't mind sharing. I'll be 42 in a couple months.
Well, let's dive into your content. I'm really excited to talk to you because I know you and I have gone back and forth over book recommendations over the years. You actually taught me a valuable lesson. You said to me once, if someone takes the time to recommend a book to you, you put it on your list. You make a real effort to read it, because if a person felt that strongly about the book to recommend it, you felt that it was respectful or whatever to take advantage of that. Is that still true?
It's true. And the cheat I have for that is the Amazon wish list, right? So I just someone's talking to me, I open the Amazon app and I add it to the wish list, and periodically I'll go through the wish list to treat myself because I have a pretty big backlog of books as it is. But that was another thing. 2020 was my record-breaking year for books. I've never read more books than I did in 2020. It turns out when you cut out my social life, I've got a lot of free time, David.
So how many books did you read in 2020?
150.
Holy moly. And do you read or listen to books, or both?
It's a breakthrough, all three. So I do Kindle, Audible, and Dead Tree books. But I would argue Dead Tree is probably 70%, because I'm a guy who marks up a lot of my books, and I know you can do it. I'm hearing the Kindle people right now, but Stephen, you can do no. I know, but I'm 100 years old, and I was raised in a period before Kindle, and so I mark up my books the old school way. I tend to Kindle books tend to be business books or sort of fun science fiction, spy novel stuff that I don't need to underline a bunch of stuff. I'm just having fun.
Gotcha. I'm the same way. I will listen to a book, and then if I really, really enjoyed it, I'll buy the print copy and sit on a Sunday morning and with my highlighter and go through it again. So
I do tend to use, I will admit that I cheat and use the 2x function in Audible, because as a native speaker, we can take advantage of this. We can listen to content at higher speeds.
I have to confess to you that I recently read or listened to Ready Player 2. And I was telling my son, I was like, gosh, this one just doesn't have the pace of the other one. It feels slow, and I don't know if I'm really into it. And about 3/4 of the way through the book, I realized I was listening at 0.7% speed.
How did you even do? Didn't it sound like this?
No, it was just enough. And Will Wheaton is the narrator, right? And I thought, man, Will just doesn't have the energy he had in the first book.
Low energy Will. Secret revealed. 0.7 really makes everybody low energy.
Oh boy.
Listeners, check your settings right now to make sure you're listening to us at least 1x. We have no guarantees below 1x.
No guarantees. No guarantees. All right. Well, talk to me about your everyday lesson. I'm really excited. Did it come from a book?
It did come from a book, nerd that I am, and interestingly, it's a book that continues to influence me. And I want to start by saying that the book recently re-entered the New York Times bestseller list. So I'm not the only person who's been reading more in lockdown. There was a book, a very famous book called The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. It was released in the 60s, and it's recently re-entered the New York Times bestselling list. So people are going back and finding stuff. And the book that has re-entered 17 years, I think, after its publication, first publication, is The 4 Hour Work Week. So I first saw this book at Barnes and Noble. For those kids who don't know what a bookstore is this place where they have dead tree books, and then you can go in and buy them. And so you would go to the business section and you just look at the titles and see, and this is where you realize that marketing your book is almost as important as actually writing the book. And so you'll see all of these book covers where we're all busy judging a book by its cover. And then based on judging a book by its cover, you buy one. And the 4 Hour Work Week's cover has two palm trees, a hammock, and someone sitting in that hammock. So with the title, The 4 Hour Work Week, and someone in a hammock, and Tim Ferriss has admitted over the years that his series sounds like a bad infomercial from 3 in the morning, right?
Yeah, it's like
But
8-minute abs, right?
right. But it worked. It created the sort of people like, oh, they almost hate Reddit, right? Like, oh, let me see about Mr. 4 Hour Work Week. And then it turns out that they really loved it. So I wanted to be prepared for your episode. So I have pulled up some page numbers and some quotes to give people some sense of things. And I want to make sure that I explain. When I first read this, I did not take the fruit of it. I read it and I almost said, well, I'll get to do that when I sell my business, which is ironically what the book is trying to argue, that you're living your life now, not living your life for the future. And so I the very first lesson I learned was I was still, even though got all this information from the book, I was still outsourcing the life I wanted to live to some future date when I sold my company. So I first came across the book in 2008. I think it was published in 2006. And then I didn't sell my business until 2012. I can tell you, I was living with all of this information for years, waiting to take action. And uh, I wouldn't say I'm embarrassed by that because I know what my priorities were at the time, but it just goes to show you that information is not enough. It's action that matters. Because if all of us have access to information, it's what we do with that information that really matters. So here on page 7, uh, people ask you what you do, and he says, the whole truth would take too long. How can I possibly explain that what I do with my time and what I do for money are completely different things? That I work less than 4 hours per week and make more per month than I used to make in a year. And that's the whoa, 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 whoa. Because for most of us, those two ideas are connected. What I do with my time and what I do with what I do for money are the same thing. And that's okay. I don't want to attack anybody and say this makes you a bad person. It's just that we don't even consider the thought experiment of separating those into separate things. Like, well, what do I do with my time? So to answer, if I was David, I get to barbecue. I spend time with my kids. I have this Jeep. I do all, I do all these things. Oh yes, how do I make money? Those things aren't connected. And for most of us, because we spend so many hours at our job, it gets harder and harder to say that I actually do anything other than, well, yes, when I have enough energy or time, I do those things. But those aren't really the centers of my life. They're what I do when I'm done working. So he says later on that same page, this is page 7, life doesn't have to be so damn hard. It really doesn't. Most people, my past self included, have spent too much time convincing themselves that life has to be hard, a resignation to 9 to 5 drudgery in exchange for sometimes relaxing weekends and the occasional keep it short or get fired vacation.
Ouch. That is a painful way of looking at our normal careers, isn't it?
Right. This is all in the introduction. So I'm not even getting into the book. This is the title of the introduction is My Story and Why You Need This Book. So this is on page 9. Why do it all in the first place? What is the pot of gold that justifies spending the best years of your life hoping for happiness in the last? And he refers to this as a deferred life plan, which is an operating system that worked for our parents, our grandparents, and frankly, many, many generations before, which is I'm going to work hard, maybe save up a little bit, and then I've got to pass it on to my family, and then I'm going to die. And that's fine. I don't want to indict our parents, our grandparents. They were living by the paradigm of their times. They didn't have the ability to write books, create courses, build internet businesses, work location independent the way that we do. We're in a very empowered time. But that is a question that has to be answered. What is the justification? And I would lengthen his phrase. What justifies spending the best days of the best weeks of the best years of your life hoping for happiness at the end? And who told you that you're going to live for X number of years? I smile a little bit inside when people say, well, when I'm X years old, I'm going to do such and such. And it's like, well, who told you you're going to? Better people than you and I have died already, right? Long before they got to that age. And it's very presumptuous to say, I'm going to do that. Not only because you don't know that you're going to live that long, but the sort of harder question is, well, why aren't you doing that now? How do you know you even want to do it? So he follows on with some bullet points. How do your decisions change if retirement isn't an option? What if you could use a mini retirement to sample your deferred life plan reward before working 40 years for it? Which is funny. Is people say, I'm going to go retire in Argentina and like own a vineyard. And you ask them, have you ever lived in Argentina? No. So let me get this straight. You're going to save up money your whole life and move to a place you've never even lived in for a week? Like, how does that work? And then the last question in that bullet point, is it really necessary to work like a slave to live like a millionaire?
This is where I question my ability to be a good podcast host, because I just hear these things and I'm just sitting in and just, I'm thinking so hard about how this impacts me personally that I sometimes forget I'm supposed to be conducting an interview.
Well, that's perfectly fine. Why don't we think about it from your perspective when you think about these things?
What I was just thinking was, I have really no intention of retiring. Like, I might quit my job at some point, but I don't see the point in not doing the things that I do. I love traveling and speaking in front of organizations, and lately, a lot of Zoom meetings and things like that. And I'm like, why would I stop doing that? Why would I stop writing? Why would I stop promoting my books?
Yeah, I totally reject that idea of retirement. I think it's an invented pot of gold that people use to justify the 40-hour work week. Say, well, if you do this for 40 years, you get to retire. And people thought that, oh, I guess I could do that. And I'm sure that many of your listeners will have already heard this, because I feel this story has made its way through, like once it hits a TED Talk, like everyone's heard about it. But there's a Okinawan word called Ikigai. Are you familiar with this?
No.
So the Okinawans are some of the longest lived people on Earth. And in studying their population, people have found out there's no word for retirement in that society, but they do have a word that roughly translates into English as reason to get up in the morning. And they find that people in Okinawa who lose their ikigai, maybe it was their wife or their kids or something like that, that's usually when they die. And not there's not a question of retirement. It's a question of, am I doing what I was put here on earth to do? Well, if as long as I'm doing that, then I'm alive. And so I think that speaks to what you're talking about. Like, well, why would I want to retire? Well, because retirement's not attractive for people who are doing what they want to do. Why would I want to stop doing what I want to do? Retirement's only attractive for people who are stuck in the 40-hour work week with the idea of, I'm going to trade all of this time for a promised future in which I will get to do what I want to do if I have the health to do it. And why defer when you can go find out now? And when I refer to that deferred life plan reward versus a mini retirement, those are things that are feasible. Tim points out, you could go to Argentina for a week and live there, make that a vacation this year, and find out, how do you like life in Argentina? Could you see yourself retiring here? The only way to find out is to go. But the idea of the deferred life plan sometimes doesn't even have any background to it. So people say, this is what I'm going to do when I retire, but they don't have any experience doing that. And that's even sadder. So not only is it a pot of gold that they're chasing, but even the pot of gold seems to be fictional because they've never tested it.
I remember reading this book, and it was one of your recommendations to me. And at the time, I definitely got some great takeaways from it. And it forced me to reevaluate what I was doing for a living and spend more time doing some of the things that I really loved. It may have even been a catalyst in me finally writing everyday lessons every day. But I also remember thinking that it was a bunch of bunk too. Like, there's no way that I could make ends meet by only working 4 hours a week or 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week, because I've got this big house payment and I'm responsible for all these people in my house, and insurance and retirement. And uh, but you've kind of actually followed his path, right?
I think your reaction is one that he's cataloged. He's talked about that. People would email him and say, I hated your book when I read it, and they come back and say, now I live in, Thailand and I have like 3 businesses or something. So once I've laid that groundwork, just a few fun tips that I thought I would add is from page 10. Increase your per hour results 10 times or more with counterintuitive techniques for cultivating selective ignorance, developing a low information diet, and otherwise ignoring the unimportant. I don't know what's going on in the news. People always give you lectures on being informed, but I point out that that's not helping me live my life. Being quote unquote informed on the quote unquote issues is not a priority in my life. I have so many other things that I'm excited about that I'm working on that I don't have time for that. That's what he calls the low information diet.
And I'm gonna guess, I'm gonna interrupt you for a second, that you're not spending an hour plus a day on social media.
I try to tie social media activities to things I'm already doing. So, for example, I only do Twitter at breakfast. So once breakfast ends, that's it for Twitter for the day. I'll just catch up on all my ats and replies the next day. Same thing with Facebook. Facebook's at dinner. Now, I'm a single man and I live by myself, so I'm not advocating that people ignore their family and do Twitter. But I'm saying that you can tie, like, I I spent a year with Masterclass, subscribed to that service. I watched all my masterclasses while I was working out. So I just tied an activity to something. Once you do that, that means it doesn't invade the rest of your life. I'm not subject to notifications. Social media has to be controlled. Otherwise you'll get owned by it. You're fighting with a platform that's engineered and run by people much smarter than you, whose main job is to keep you on the platform. And you think you're going to outsmart them? You've got to find a way to put the cookies in the cookie jar and lock yourself away.
I want to touch on something you just said about tying an activity to another activity, because for me, I hear people say, I don't have time to read. I don't have time to listen to a podcast. And I always challenge that. I'm like, well, how long does it take you to shower and brush your teeth and put your clothes on? Like, maybe that's 10 minutes, maybe that's 15 minutes. You could, listen to an audiobook while you're doing those things. I'm notorious for consuming content when I work out as well. Now, it might be a podcast or an audiobook, or sometimes we have these long meetings that I have to be on, and I'll just get on my Peloton. Instead of sitting at my desk and listening to this meeting, I'll be riding a bike for 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
lately though, I got to admit, workouts have been tied to the Clone Wars cartoon episode. Anyway, back to your book. Is there anything else from it that you took away that really impacted your life?
So much, so much. But I like I said, I don't want to bore your listeners by just keep reading passages. I think the main takeaway I have is the term lifestyle design was introduced into the vernacular by Tim Ferriss. I'm not saying that no one else used it but he popularized it.
And you really believe that your life has been designed and impacted by reading that book in 2008?
It was a time bomb because I read it in 2008 and then I sort of went into denial about it because I thought, well, these are all important questions, but I'm going to sell my business. Just because it was my own business doesn't mean that I wasn't falling into the same pitfalls. This isn't an attack on people who have jobs. It's an attack on people who aren't intentionally living their life and putting their life into an optimized way of living it. If you really like chess and then you say, I never have time for it, the number one reframe in your life for that to audit yourself is when you say you don't have time for something, just say such and such is not a priority for me and see how that sits with you. right? I'd love to spend more time with my sisters, but I don't have time for that. Say, okay, so I'd love to spend more time with my sisters, but it's not a priority for me.
Ouch.
If you don't like how it sounds, then you don't get to use the crap excuse that everyone and their mom's dog uses, which is I don't have time. That is a lie. Everybody has time. And that's what you alluded to when you said people say, oh, I don't have time to do this. I'm like, okay, tell me about your commute to work. Tell me about your workout schedule. Tell me about your shutdown routine at night. Like I can find easily 15 to 30 to 45 minutes a day in anybody's schedule. I say that without qualification. It's the same thing here is that I read the book. I'm like, oh, these are really great ideas. But I had my head down working, I would say anywhere between 50 and 70 hours a week building this company because I was in my early 20s and I had this vision that this was what I was supposed to do. I was going to sell this company. And it wasn't until I sold the business that I was able to look back and look at all the sacrifices I have made to do that. And I couldn't argue that they were all worth it. All the weekends I didn't spend with my family, the girls that I chased away essentially by not giving them time when they wanted to date me more. A lot of people want to just say, oh, it was all worth it. It's like, no, I don't regret that I built my business and sold it, but I'm not going to be naive that it cost me something tangible that wasn't financial. I had to sacrifice relationships, time with my family. And do I want to do that again? And selling the business allowed me to step back and say, what could I do differently? What other types of businesses could I build? Do I need to have a big house? Do I need to have vehicle? Like one of the things I talk about all the time living in Paris is I don't have a car payment, but I also don't have anything associated with cars. So I don't have car registration, car insurance, car wash, oil change. Once that money disappears from your budget and you have a sudden surplus, you think, well, I'm never going to give that money back. Now, I'm not saying everybody can live in a walkable city, a 2,000-year-old city like Paris, which was built for pedestrians and has metro stations. But I'm saying that once you make changes to your life, these sudden tectonic shifts happen, and you ask yourself, why wasn't I ever able to think about it differently? And sometimes you just have to be at a different stage in your journey. So when I read the book in 2008, I really wasn't ready for the message. It was so radical. It was so crazy. But it did start to prick the idea of what is the purpose? Like, why am I doing this? What's the end goal? And I think when you're in your 20s, you're vague, like, oh, I'm going to earn some money. I'm going to do X. I'm going to do Y. You're not really having a clear, focused vision. And I think I'm at the stage in my life, thankfully, where people say, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, same place I see myself now. I'm living my dream life. Like, I hope to continue to live my dream life. But I don't see myself different in the sense of I'm not reaching for something that I haven't attained. I've designed my life the way that I want. I get to live think about that when people are on vacation or they say, oh, I had an excellent week. I said, what was excellent about that week? So I did X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, why can't every week be like that? Or to some extent like that. And your life ordered around your priorities, right? This is it. Like we only have one life. If you're not living your life according to your priorities, like what's the point?
Stephen, during that last little phrase, I took off my interviewer hat again and put on my listener hat. And I felt a tinge of, I hate you when you said, I'm living my dream life, and you know, I love you. Right. But I think some of our listeners are going to be like, well, God, I hate this guy. Or like he's, he's told his business, he's single, blah, blah, blah. But what advice would you give them? What do you want their takeaway from this interview to be?
I know people who are married. I know people who have kids who have, you could say, even dreamier lives than myself. I think the question is really asking yourself, what is it that you want, and being willing to examine the assumptions that undergird our life. And you can go an extreme version of this would be like the FIRE movement and Mr. Money Mustache and being like, we're going to save all this money. And then the other would, let's say the extreme would be 4-hour work week. I'm going to build these different businesses. So if the takeaway from today is Stephen wants me to build a business and work a 4-hour work week, like, I'm sorry, that's not what I want you to take away. I want you to say, am I living the life that I want? If not, why not? And when you answer all the why nots, ask, are all of these assumptions bulletproof? Can I take it to anyone in my life and say, is this true? So let's say one of those assumptions, I must work this job in this city. Well, 2020 revealed to a bunch of people, and we're watching the greatest migration in the US probably since the 1960s. Once people were told you don't have to live in the city anymore, they left. They were only in that city for that job and they moved. So what was a true assumption in the past was rendered not factual anymore by 2020. I would argue that there are other assumptions in your life that don't need a pandemic to be undermined. They're just limiting beliefs you've put on yourself or things that you've said to make yourself feel better about your complacency. Like when you hear someone has money, it's like, oh, well, I'm glad I don't have money. Money changes people. Whatever you want to tell yourself, bro. But like, that's just a limiting belief that you have. You're not willing to accept, what if I could do things differently, and being open minded to it. What happens is people say, well, I could do that, but blah, 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 blah. It's like, yes, but what if you succeeded? And I think that's the challenge. It's very scary to step back and say, I'm not living the life that I want. On behalf of your listeners, I would feel pretty attacked as well. But I hope that it's the good type of attack that gnaws at the back of your brain and that leads you to ask those hard questions. Because if you're not living the life that you want, what is stopping you? It's not me, it's you. And those who are married with kids, you have other people to help you with your accountability. I'm a single guy, I have to do this all by myself. But I actually think there's more power when you have a spouse or you have children and you guys can go on this journey together. And I think that's exciting. Now, it's not always easy to convince everybody, but I think it's always leading by example that starts to win people over.
Kids, this weekend we are not going to Disney. Instead, we're going to sit around and read the 4-Hour Work Week as a family. This will guide our endeavors in 2021 as a team.
Given that Disney is closed, this might be the ideal time to do that.
Well, Stephen, I can't thank you enough. I had high expectations for our interview, and you completely lived up to them and blew some of them out of the water. So I appreciate your time so much. I appreciate your friendship. And I hope the listeners feel gnawed at, feel challenged, and I think they will. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, I was so into that interview that I forgot to ask Stephen for his contact information. So I'm going to share that with you here. He's at Stephen Heiner, that's StephenHeiner, on Instagram, Twitter, and Mapster. And he has a book club at patreon.com/Stephen Heiner. Now, I don't know if you could tell, but Stephen and I have been friends for a long time. He's one of those people that challenges me every time we talk. I hope you have friends like that. Friends who, when you complain about something, just because you feel like complaining, they ask you, well, why don't you do something about it? It's not always easy to spend time with people like that, I know. When someone challenges your core beliefs, it really makes you look at your life and face the truth. And I hope that's exactly what happened to you today. And so I challenge you. Write Ikigai on your wrist. That's Ikigai. And every time you look at it, ask yourself, what is your reason for living? And are you living the life you want? And if not, what's stopping you? Let me know what happens when you implement this lesson by reaching out to me personally or posting your story on social media with the hashtag EverydayLessonsEveryday. And if you like this podcast, please share it with a friend. Let's see if together we can make the world a better place. Finally, if you or someone you know has an everyday lesson that they'd like to share, I'd love to hear from them. Put us in touch. I can be reached at david@davidmcbee.com. I'll see you next time. Now go out there and do something awesome.
No, I don't mind sharing. I'll be 42 in a couple months.
42. Yeah, that is about the age when you start getting up a little more often in the middle of the night.
Oh, little pre-show inside joke there, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, well, I turned 50 this last, a couple of weeks ago, and boy, I'll tell you one thing, Stephen. I got up one night about 3 a.m, and my knee has just been killing me, right? And I thought to myself, man, I picked the wrong side of the bed 20 years ago. Because And my wife was that much closer to the bathroom. That's 8 feet I could had back.
Well, it's funny because I've never been married and I've never been in that situation because I get to choose which side of the bed I'm going to sleep on. Uh, but it's weird. You sometimes will impose that even when you go to a hotel room, right? You're like, well, I normally sleep on that side, so that's where. But it's a hotel. It's not your house, and it's
Totally.
strange. I remember some statistic about sitting in assigned seats. There are no assigned seats when you get to college, for example, but where you sit on your first day of class in college, 85% or something of that people will stay in those seats for the rest of the semester, which
Wow.
I find is a great example of how we have this sort of comfort of routine as humans,